Okay, here's the third part of chapter 12. So this is functional brain systems. We're going to look at how neurons work together, like in the limbic system and the reticular formation. We've seen those words, but we're going to look more into them. Okay, so limbic system. Okay, so this is composed of structures in the cerebral hemisphere and the diencephalon and how they work together. So a large function of the limbic system is for emotion, or this word affective. The word affect in this context means emotion. So for example, the amygdaloid body recognizes angry and fearful facial expressions, and then it talks to the brain and tells it what to understand from that if it sees those facial expressions. And then the cingulate gyrus helps with expressing emotion using gestures. So it kind of translates what your brain is thinking into facial expressions. Okay, so let's see, diencephalic structures in the limbic system. You have the anterior thalamic nuclei, the hypothalamus, and the mammillary body. So those are the parts there. And then the parts that connect that to the cerebrum are the fornix and the anterior commissure. And then the parts in the cerebrum that are working together here in the limbic system include the amygdaloid body, hippocampus, dentate gyrus, and parahippocampal gyrus. So right here, these structures. So the red part, they talk to each other and cause these functions that we looked at. Okay, so it can put an emotional response to odors, like if you smell a skunk, you know that's bad. Also, it can play a role in psychosomatic illnesses. Those are illnesses where, maybe I shouldn't define it here, but where they originate from your head, but then they cause body symptoms, somatic symptoms. The limbic system also interacts with your prefrontal lobes, so it helps you to understand and react emotionally to things. And then the hippocampus and amygdaloid body also help with memory. So all of these are entangled in all these different functions. Okay, reticular formation. This is involving mostly your brainstem. So the parts that it involves are the raphe nuclei, the medial group of nuclei, and the lateral group of nuclei. So let's keep going. So reticular activating system. What this does is it keeps you awake, conscious, and alert. It helps you to filter out stimuli that are repetitive that you don't really need to know about, so that you can focus on the important things. The reticular activating system can be inhibited by your sleep centers, alcohol, and drugs, and so those are things that make you not conscious and alert. Or by coma, we saw that. Okay, so these are really important for staying alive, the reticular formation. It helps you with coarse limb movements. It also helps regulate visceral functions like your vasomotor centers, cardiac centers, and respiratory centers. So let's see here. So reticular activating center, like for example, you have information coming from your eye, from visual impulses or auditory impulses, or visceral, like touch, pain, temperature, and then that information goes into your brainstem, and then it sends out information to the rest of your brain to keep you awake and aroused. Okay, so major brain regions. This is a handy table to go through and take notes on. So this first part is your cerebral hemisphere. These are the pages that you can look up some of this information. In terms of the cortical, the outer gray matter helps you localize and interpret sensory inputs, controls voluntary and skilled skeletal muscle activities, functions, and intellectual and emotional processing. So this is including all four, I think, This would include all 4 lobes, so your frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe, and your insular lobe inside. Then your thalamus and your hypothalamus, remember those are part of your diencephalon. So the thalamus is the relay, helps with memory. Hypothalamus regulates all of these things that keep you alive and talks to your pituitary. So it's kind of a nervous system organ and an endocrine organ kind of together. Your limbic system includes part of your cerebral and your diencephalon. So it's kind of both of those regions. And it regulates emotional response. Your brainstem has these 4, well, plus your reticular formation, but this is all your brainstem. The heart of the brain keeps you alive, and then your cerebellum. Okay, let's look at some higher mental functions. So these are some higher mental functions that humans can do that some of these make us different from other animals. So language, memory, brain waves, and EEGs, consciousness, and then your sleep-wake cycles. Okay, so language is a really complex function that we have, mostly in the left hemisphere. It involves Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which we've seen before. Broca's area helps us to speak, to produce speech, which is a lot harder than it seems. So if people have problems in Broca's area, they know what they want to say, they just can't produce the words. They can't put it together and make words. And then Wernicke's area is allowing us to understand spoken and written words. So patients that have lesions in Wernicke's area, they can't understand speech very well, and they also they could say words, but they may not make sense. So right here is Broca's area, and right here is Wernicke's area. Okay, memory is the next one. So memory deals with storage and retrieval of information. There's 4 different types of memory. This stuff is really interesting. So declarative memory is knowing names, faces, words, and dates. Procedural memory is like remembering how to do things like type on a keyboard, playing piano. That's different from motor memory, which is like riding a bike. So your body remembers how to do it, right? And then emotional memory is remembering something that's linked to an emotion. Okay, the 2 types of declarative memory now are short-term and long-term, which you've probably heard of. Short-term is working memory. Some people have limited working memories. Some people have limited long-term memories. They're different. So working memory is being able to hold information in your head and kind of juggle it. And then, and usually you can only hold 7 or 8 pieces of information before you have to like write it down to make sense of something. And then long-term memory is potentially limitless if it's functioning correctly. Okay, so typically we are able to transfer short-term memory to long-term memory, but there's different things that can affect whether we can do that and to what extent. So your emotional state matters. If you're alert, motivated, surprised, or aroused, you're able to transfer. Repetition and practice. Association, like tying new information with old background knowledge. And then automatic memory, sometimes your subconscious can store it. And then we can also consolidate our memories, like fitting them into like filing cabinets, if you think of it that way, of already stored information. And so these are the parts that help with that. Okay, so you have outside stimulus, and your autonomic memory can shoot it right to long-term memory if needed. Or you can have a temporary storage that can be transferred to short-term memory. And if things are right, it'll be transferred to long-term memory, and then you can retrieve it. Or the data can be lost if you forget. There's, of course, lots of disorders that can affect memory. So anterograde amnesia is where your consolidated memories are not lost, so you still have those, but you can't associate new ones with old ones. And then retrograde amnesia is losing long-term memory. Okay, one way that they can measure and figure out what's going on in the brain is using EEGs, and I actually have an EEG in my classroom, and they're really fun to use. So if you ever have an opportunity to see one used, they're getting more and more commonly used in clinical applications. So it's really hard to measure brain activity. So fMRIs are used, but EEGs are a little bit easier and cheaper. So that stands for electroencephalogram, and it records the electrical activity of the brain. And it's used a lot, even it's getting used more and more because they're more accessible. So you can use it to diagnose epilepsy, sleep disorders, lesions, tumors, infarcts, infections, abscesses. Done a lot on research in the brain, but also in clinical applications now. So this is what it looks like, and it has different electrodes that they connect to different parts of the brain, and then they can detect the electrical activity. So it measures neuronal electrical activity, and it measures it in hertz and frequencies. And then there's 4 different types of waves that it measures: alpha, beta, theta, and delta. So alpha waves are 8 to 13 hertz, beta waves are 14 to 30, and theta waves are 4 to 7. Alpha waves are when your brain is like idling. Beta waves are when you're more mentally alert. And then theta waves are more in children, not as common in awake adults. Oh, and then delta waves, I think I said that. These are waves when you're in deep sleep, reticular activating system is suppressed, anesthesia. If you see them, it indicates brain damage. Okay, so this is what they look like. They have different frequencies and patterns. So alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves, and delta waves. And then if you see these different types of waves in different parts of the brain, they indicate different things. So epileptic seizure is when you have electrical discharges and they don't let messages get through. And so people can lose consciousness, fall, have jerking. So that's a disorder that can affect the brain. Some other ones are auras, which are hallucinations. They sometimes come before a seizure. They're like a sign of a seizure. Absence seizure is when people kind of go blank for a few seconds. They're common in, not common, but they're more common in children. Tonic-clonic seizures, that's another word for grand mal, and that's the most severe. That's what you think of when you think of a seizure, where people can lose consciousness and they're not able to stand up, and it lasts several minutes. And you can control epilepsy with drugs. They also have vagus nerve stimulators, deep brain stimulators, things like that. Okay, consciousness. Consciousness is perception of sensation. You have voluntary initiation and control of movements, higher mental processing. And I'm going to go through some of this kind of quickly because this is taking a while. So some things that can affect consciousness are fainting or syncope when you lose consciousness, or coma, that's extended period. Brain death is irreversible coma, and they have a hard time defining whether people are dead or alive. Okay, sleep-wake cycle. So there's 2 types of sleep. There's non-rapid eye movement and there's rapid eye movement, REM, which if you track your sleep, you might have heard of these. Okay, so we usually have 2 stages of non-rapid eye movement within the first 30 to 45 minutes of sleep, and then we go into stages 3 and 4, which is slow wave speech. And then at about 90 minutes, we generally go into REM sleep, rapid eye movement. And the difference is we have temporary paralysis, rapid eye movement, oxygen consumption, heart rate, and breathing increase. And that's usually when we dream. So here's awake. These are, I think these are EEGs. So awake, REM, non-REM, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see the differences between those. Sleep is regulated in the reticular, the RES, and we usually alternate between REM and REM. So here's an example of that. You kind of go in and out of them, and this is when you're dreaming right here. Okay, so sleep is really important. REM sleep especially. If people don't go into REM sleep enough, they get moody and depressed. It helps analyze your day's events. That's what you're dreaming. You're figuring out. You're eliminating unneeded synapses. We don't need as much sleep as we get older. Narcolepsy is that disorder where you abruptly fall asleep. And then insomnia is when you have trouble sleeping. Okay, protection of the brain. So meninges I think we've looked at these before already, maybe. So these cover and protect the central nervous system. They protect blood vessels. There's cerebral spinal fluid, so it protects your brain. There's 3 layers: the dura mater, arachnoid matter, and pia mater. So here are the 3 layers here. Let's see. Dura mater, arachnoid matter, and pia mater. So the dura mater is the strongest. It's got 2 layers fused. It helps to limit excessive brain movement, so your brain isn't squishing around very much. Let me see here. I'm not sure where it's showing. So dura mater is right here on the outside. Okay. Yep, so right here's dura mater. So that's going to protect your brain. Arachnoid matter is the middle. It's spider web-like extensions. It's there's a subdural space. And there's cerebral spinal fluid in there, and there's large blood vessels too. Okay, so it looks like a spider web. You can remember that because it's arachnoid, right? And then pia mater is delicate connective tissue that kind of hugs the brain. It's kind of like saran wrap to the brain. It follows every convolution, has little blood vessels. There are disorders that you can get, like meningitis, as inflammation of the meninges. And then if that spreads to the central nervous system, that can lead to encephalitis and be really dangerous. They can do a lumbar puncture to see if you have meningitis, to see if there's an infection in your meninges. Cerebral spinal fluid is that fluid that surrounds the brain. It gives it buoyancy and protection, kind of buffers it. Like if there's someone hits your head, it kind of takes in some of that pressure, and it nourishes the brain, carries chemical signals. Okay, you have a choroid plexus, which is a bunch of capillaries that hang from the roof of the ventricle, and cerebral spinal fluid is filtered there. So this is kind of an immune, able to filter the cells and clean and remove waste. Usually you filter at 150 mils every 8 hours. Okay, so let me see here. So you can see that it flows. It's showing the direction that it flows out and then is filtered. So you can see all this cerebral spinal fluid flows through and is filtered. And here's the circulation again. So you have stuff circulating in to the blood and then new fluid coming out. Okay, here's some disorders. Hydrocephalus is one where there's an obstruction and your cerebral spinal fluid can't drain, so it increases pressure. In newborns, the skull bones are unfused, and so that can increase pressure. And so what they have to do is shunt it and drain your cerebral spinal fluid. So that's a picture of hydrocephalus. You have a blood-brain barrier that helps your brain kind of stay separate from everything else from your blood. If your brain was exposed to all the things happening in your blood, you would have a lot of neuron firings that you shouldn't. So there's these little junctions that keep stuff in and out, that only let certain things into the brain that are existing in the rest of your body. So substances can move through simple diffusion, which we've learned about, but also through specific transport mechanisms, like you have facilitated diffusion through channel proteins that are only going to allow certain things to come in and out. Okay, so you have all these neural glial cells that are going to control what goes in and out of your brain. You also have a thick basement membrane that creates another barrier that doesn't let things go through, but in some areas that is absent, like your vomiting center and your hypothalamus. Okay, brain injuries. So here's some injuries that can happen: concussion, contusion, subdural or subarachnoid hemorrhage, or cerebral edema. So you can read what each of those are. You can also get strokes, which is ischemia. That's where the tissue doesn't have blood supply. It can cause death of the brain tissue. or you can have hemiplegia, which is paralysis on one side. There are transient ischemic attacks, which is like a transient stroke kind of, or tissue plasminogen activator, TPA, you might have heard of. This is a treatment for stroke. Okay, Alzheimer's disease is a really common brain disorder that can happen. It causes dementia. They think that it's because there are proteins that are misfolded. Can cause symptoms like memory loss, shortened attention span, disorientation, language loss, irritability, moodiness, confusion, hallucinations, and the brain starts to shrink and die. So this is an fMRI, I think, showing normal and Alzheimer's. Parkinson's is another degenerative brain disorder, degeneration of the dopamine releasing neurons. And they are not really sure what causes it, but they do have some treatments that they're working on. Huntington's disease is a dominant hereditary disorder. It's caused by an accumulation of huntingtin, which is a protein. So if you get enough that has accumulated, then it'll start causing symptoms, and it usually happens like after you're 30 years old, usually fatal within 15 years of when you see symptoms. But they do have some treatments that will block the effects. Okay, there are ways that they can assess a central nervous system dysfunction. One of them is that knee-jerk hammer evaluation, and they can determine if there's abnormal responses. They can also use CTs, MRIs, and PET scans to look for issues, and that's it.